G'day all, long time no see. Well, here I am in Tasmania. We got a modified FriBaT for you today. I am going to review a Tasmanian beer, but I'm going to talk a little bit about the trip down and all the fun and games we had getting from the Northern Territory down to Tasmania. Anyway, let's start off with the beer. Today we're reviewing another one of Tassie's beers, and this is the Hobart Brewing Co.'s Extra Pale Ale. This is a Tasmanian strength hoppy pale ale, where extra means more malt and more hops. A beer for those who like hoppy citrus driven beer with a balanced bitterness that leans towards an IPA than a pale ale on the hop scale. Okay, so Indian pale ales are definitely more hoppy. Happy Friday. Wow, that's really nice. This is 1.7 standard drinks in a 375ml can, so that gives it an alcohol volume of 5.6%. It's made in Tasmania, in Hobart, which is the south of the state. I live in the north of the state. That's a really nice pale ale. Yes, it is. It's definitely more hoppy than a standard pale ale, but not as hoppy as an Indian pale ale. So it's somewhere in between. That's actually a very good description of it they've given. That's a really nice beer. I don't think I've had a bad Tasmanian beer yet. Like we've said before, there's no such thing as bad beer, just better beer. That is a nice beer. Well done, Hobart Brewing Company. On my spanner scale, what do we give the Hobart Brewing Company Extra Pale Ale? Damn, that's a 4.5 out of 5 spanners for me. That's a nice beer. All right, on to the story of how we got from the Northern Territory to Tasmania. It was filled with fun, games, trepidation, and a whole lot of concern at one point. Firstly, before we left Katherine, there had been a COVID outbreak, and especially for those of you in the States who for some reason the media over there are playing that we're in the lockdown, everyone's locked down and we can't do anything and it's a police state, and it's absolute rubbish. There have been a few lockdowns in some areas, and that has saved lives. We have not had anywhere near the deaths in Australia from COVID as what other countries have had. And yes, it causes some concern and inconvenience for some people, but at the end of the day, lockdowns generally are for a relatively short amount of time now, and unless you live in Melbourne, and probably have worked quite well. We're moving out of that now. We're moving into a phase where if you have been to a hotspot where there have been a number of cases, then it is more difficult to travel interstate. Other states won't allow you to cross the borders. So that's basically what happened to us. We were, Katherine had an outbreak, only a few cases, and they put us into a 3-day lockdown, I think. And then after that, I think there was a 2-day lockout, which meant that we could go out and do things, but we couldn't actually leave the area. So that made us a couple of days late on leaving for heading south. Now, I'll put a map up. The Northern Territory is a big place. From the top of the Northern Territory to the bottom of the Northern Territory, it's a long way. In fact, I don't know how many k's it is, but it's several days' drive. And we had to travel all the way through the territory, and then we arrived at the South Australian border. Now, to get there was interesting nonetheless. We took 3 days to get to the border of South Australia, but even getting to the border was difficult because we encountered floodwaters. The central part of Australia is desert. It's probably not what you think of as desert when you picture it in your mind's eye. There is still trees there, and it does get rainfall, usually some winter rainfall. And anyway, because it is vast stretches of flat, when it rains heavily, it floods. We encountered floodwaters about 50 k's out of Alice Springs, which I'll also put on the map here. The first floodwaters were about 6 inches of depth, and I'm in my beloved Monaro, by the way, towing a 6x4 foot trailer, and 6 inches of water was not a major concern, just kept the speed down, you know, just basically idling through in first gear, and it was only a couple of 100 metres, and we got through that fine. Took some video, and I'll put that up now. As we're travelling through this, there was concern but not alarm. My wife was amazed that I took the Monaro into floodwaters, as she knows how much I love my beloved Monaro. And when I told my son later on, he was also amazed that I took it into floodwaters. Anyway, no biggie. We got through, no problems, dried the brakes out, everything was fine, continued on. Probably 20 k's down the road, closer to Alice Springs, and bear in mind we had been travelling for about 600 k's this day, and we arrived at another water crossing, and there was a four-wheel drive pulled up on the left-hand side of the road, and I stopped and had a quick chat to him. This is a major highway in Australia, mind you, and he was a bit hesitant to go through, and I looked at it, and it looked like it was another 6 inches, maybe 7, 8 inches of water, still nothing major. What I hadn't seen was about, bear in mind, this water was across the road for about 400-500 metres, which is a smidge concerning. Wasn't flowing, it was sitting basically. What I couldn't see was at the other end was a creek crossing, a creek. And I knew from experience, once I saw it, once we were too far in to be able to turn around with the trailer and head back, that the creek crossing would be the deepest part, and it would also be where the most flow is. Now in Australia we have a very, very big ad campaign around Australia that says if it's flooded, forget it.
No, back it up.
When you're faced with floodwater, the smartest and bravest thing you can do is back it up. If it's flooded, forget it.
Yeah, well, I'm an idiot because I'm now in floodwaters that are flowing, not greatly, but it's getting deeper. As I'm getting towards this creek crossing, the Monaro starts coughing and dropping cylinders, and I'm getting a little bit worried at this point. So was my wife, and fortunately we had a carburetor on the front, a vinyl protector, thanks to my son who sent his up for me, and I reckon the carburetor is what has saved us. We're travelling through these floodwaters, 6-7 inches, no problems. First gear, nice and slow, and then we got to the deep part, and suddenly I'm starting to see water lapping at the front edge of the bonnet. Now I know my car very well, and the cold air intake, the large air intake for the LS1 engine, is right at the top of that, on top of the radiator, just behind that behind the edge of the bonnet. She's dropped onto 6 cylinders and starting to give a couple of coughs and a couple of jerks, and we're now into the deepest part, and I can see the end is only 10-15 metres away, and I'm now praying, come on baby, come on baby, come on baby. And we just got through, pulled up the other side. So we sat there idling for a bit. It's only running on maybe 5 cylinders, and we still had about 30 k's to go. Just to compound the fun, low fuel comes on, and I'm looking at the cold air intake. I've opened the bonnet, taken the bra off, opened the bonnet, and the bottom of the cold air intake has water. It's been wet, and I'm going, oh God, please tell me it hasn't ingested water, and that's why it's now running on only a few of its cylinders. And I'm panicking. I'm thinking, oh great, I'm going to have an engine rebuild here now. We're only not even halfway to Tasmania. we've got to get to the Spirit of Tasmania ferry by a certain date. This is all just turning to poo real fast. And so anyway, idled for a bit, and I thought, well, the low fuel's on, I've got to get to Alice. So we took off, low speeds, she's running like a pig, just blah, 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 blah. And eventually I got it into 4th or 5th gear, and it was still running on maybe 6 cylinders. It wasn't happy, and I'm starting to think we're going to run out of fuel. Oh well, at least we're on the right side of the floodwaters now. And anyway, we got into Alice Springs late in the afternoon, and we pulled up at the first service station and put fuel in it. And I think the Monaro has a 75 litre tank. I put 73.5 litres in it, so it was just about empty. And I started up, and just as we pulled into the service station, sorry, I'll go back a little bit, just as we pulled into the service station, she started running better. And I thought, I think it's come back onto all 8. Fueled up, let the heat soak a little bit whilst it was fueling up, turned off of course, and started her up, and she's running on 8. Oh, thank goodness for that. I'm looking at the front of my car. I'll put a photo up here. This is the floodlights down in the bottom of the air dam. They're full of muddy water. We got into our very nice accommodation at Alice Springs, and then and of course Alice has a river running through it that is normally dry, never flows. It might flow maybe once a year with a decent rainstorm. This thing is in flood. Almost all of the crossings across the Todd River in Alice Springs are flooded. You couldn't get across. There's one crossing left, and of course our motel had to be on the other side. That was fine, but we had to go around a goat track to get to our motel. And of course the Monaro's low, it's got hard suspension, it's not designed to go on goat tracks. Anyway, we got to our motel, thank goodness. And we were there, we designed our trip so that we were going to have 2 days in Alice, just to break up the trip a bit. Anyway, next day, got up, washed the car, and proceeded to try and get all the flood water out of everywhere, including the floodlights, which I did. Floodlights, fog lights. And we're then looking at the border crossing. We had to cross, to get to Tasmania, we actually had to do 3 border crossings, from Northern Territory to South Australia to Victoria, and then Victoria to Tasmania. Now, I knew Victoria was going to be a problem because Victoria has been badly hit with COVID. They were in very strict lockdown for a long time, and Tasmania had closed off to Victoria. They weren't allowing people to come through in Victoria. What they were allowing was people to transit from the border. I think it was about 4.5 hours drive from the South Australian border into Victoria to get to the Spirit of Tasmania. They were allowing people to do that as long as you only stopped for fuel. So you couldn't stop to stay the night. You technically couldn't stop for food to go to a restaurant or whatever, so we ended up getting takeaway in a drive-through and then got to the border. But let's go back a step. We're still in Northern Territory right now at Alice Springs, and we're looking at all of the requirements for getting into South Australia. When we left Katherine, Northern Territory is fine. You could drive straight into South Australia, no problems, no restrictions whatsoever. And then whilst we were travelling, it changed because of the COVID cases that had happened in Katherine. South Australia now required double vaxxed, which both Tracy and I are, and you had to have a COVID test on day 1, day 3 or day 5, and day 13. And you had to isolate whilst you were waiting for your COVID tests. So we arrived at the South Australian border 2 days later and talked to the very nice female copper and said, look, this is who we are, where we're from. We're going to FriBaT, which is just into South Australia. It was 600 and something k's from Alice Springs. And she said, I wouldn't go to FriBaT. Why not? Well, the testing that you've got to have, so you've got to have a test done on day 1, COVID test, would take you probably 4 or 5 days to turn around because it's remote, it's in the middle of nowhere. And she said, can you get to Port Augusta? which is another 6 hours drive. So we ended up doing 1,200 k's that day. We got into Port Augusta at 9:30, 10 o'clock at night. I was scared so much for kangaroos, etc., jumping out in front of the Monaro. And fortunately we found a nice bloke in a four-wheel drive. We used him as a buffer, I guess you'd say. Put him 100 or 50 metres in front of me. He had much better lights, and I was able to sit in behind him for all the way into Port Augusta. Got to our motel in Port Augusta, and we knew that we could get the test the next morning. So we woke up, went to the testing facility, and they said, oh yeah, it's quick turnaround, it's probably less than 24 hours, especially since you're travelling, you've come from Northern Territory. So we went and got tested first thing in the morning. We were going to be in Coober one night and then another place another night. So we ended up sort of smashing that together and had 2 nights at Port Augusta. COVID test came back negative, as you'd expect, and things were starting to look a little bit better now. So we had our 2 nights in Port Augusta. We travelled on to a place called Noarlunga, which is south of Adelaide, and that coincided with our, I think it was 3-day, can't remember, 3-day or 5-day test, 3-day or 5-day test. We had to have another COVID test, and you had to isolate whilst you're waiting for that. So we had that, and then we moved on, and of course negative, and then we moved on to our next overnight stop, which was right near the border. And we designed that so that we could just do a run from the border straight to the Spirit of Tasmania dock, which is right in Melbourne, and get onto the Spirit. The Spirit was accepting vehicles from about 5:30 in the afternoon, so we knew we'd leave about lunchtime and we would get to the Spirit. Uneventful trip into Victoria. Nobody on the border in Victoria, because Victoria just let anyone in. We bolted straight to the ferry terminal and sat in the car, waited for the vehicle opening. Uneventful trip on the Spirit, didn't get much sleep. It's an overnight trip to Tasmania. It's about 11 hours or 12 hours or something or other. And we got in very early the next morning. And we finally made it to Tasmania, to the boat docks at a little town called Devonport, which is only about an hour and a half, not even that, hour and a quarter from Launceston, which is where we were staying waiting for our removal. So we knew we were going to be a couple of weeks ahead of our removal. So we're staying in a serviced apartment, I guess you'd say, had minor, sort of cooking facilities, and we came to the property every day, and we did a stack of work in that couple of weeks while we were waiting for our removal. We got so much done. We did mess up slightly in that we should have had a mower contractor come through and mow our 2+ acres. I had bought a $50 mower, and we ran this thing flat out for 4 days. My wife is a machine when it comes to mowing. She just went on and on and on. She's like the Energizer bunny, and we just kept almost hot fueling, and eventually got through the 2.2 acres I think we've got, and mowed it all down. And it was tough work. It was knee-high grass just about everywhere. So that was good. We started into the renovation work, which will be a separate video. I'll talk about some of the renovations that we didn't film a lot because it was just too difficult. We just wanted to get things done, prepared for our removal to arrive, because we knew we had next to no space. We had left a 5-bedroom modern home into a 3-bedroom 1975 house, and my shed's not built. So that's part of the other saga, is that the council has caused me some angst in delaying my shed building. So I knew that I had to, we ended up with 4 containers, 4 20-foot containers, over 100 and, I think about 110 cubic metres of removal. So I knew, double garage, a little bit bigger than double garage here, so I knew packing everything in was going to be difficult. So we did a lot of renovation work, and the removals arrived. Long story short, a stack of stuff got broken, mostly glass, picture frames, things like that, but a few other bits and pieces. absolutely one of the poorest packing I've ever seen by a removal company. And anyway, we're here. We're in, and we've been doing stacks of work, and it's been tiring. I want to go back to work because it's much easier being at work than this retirement gig. This retirement gig is hard work, but it's enjoyable. It is rewarding. Anyway, this has been a really long FriBaT. I've really enjoyed this beer, and I'm a bit dry. I need some more. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope it wasn't too long for you. A little bit about where we are. The long story short is that we finally made it to Tasmania after 1, 2, 3, 4, I don't know how many days travelling. I'll put it up here, and I'll put a map of how far it was from Katherine to Launceston. It was an interesting trip, to say the least. The Monaro is fine. It's all clean. It's actually in my neighbour's shed, which is very nice of him because I just did not have anywhere I could put it under cover. So that was wonderful. Thanks very much, Ray, if you're watching. Anyway, we're here. So happy Friday to you. Also, this is probably going to be my only FriBaT before Christmas. Christmas tree's up. So we're only 9 days out from Christmas now, so I probably won't get another FriBaT done next week because it's just got so much stuff going on. Wonderfully, I've got my kids and their partners coming down just after Christmas to stay for a week. So I'm trying to do a lot of renovations work, get things put away, etc., and make it nice for their visit. Anyway, Merry Christmas. I hope everything's really good where you are. I hope you have a safe and happy Christmas. Please have a safe time over your holiday if you're having any holidays. And I will have a FriBaT for you probably before the new year. But there definitely will be a house update video, a reno video, coming very soon. Anyway, thanks for watching. Happy Friday. Cheers.